In this lesson, we're going to look at how you can classify numbers. So how do I classify numbers? Well, we have real numbers, and real numbers can be broken down into rational numbers and irrational numbers. We're going to spend more time talking about the rational numbers today, and just a little bit just defining the irrational numbers, and we'll come back to the irrational numbers in a couple of days. So what are rational numbers? Well, rational numbers are fractions made up of two rational numbers. So for example, I could have 1/3. I can have 3/8. Okay? I could even have what's going to be a whole number, 9/3. Those are all rational numbers. If they're written as a fraction, any number, as long as they're made up of two rational numbers, it's going to be a rational number. Then we have our terminating decimals. Remember, to terminate means to stop. So it's any decimal that stops. For example, the whole number 5, it stops. I could have 2.83. Well, that number stops. 0.418. Okay? So all of those decimals are decimals that stop, terminating, meaning that they're stopping. They don't go on and on. Well, our repeating decimals are decimals that are going to go on and on, but they repeat themselves. So I could have 4.23, which means it's going to be 4.232323. And so those are going to be the types of decimals that are repeating. All right, then let's just spend just a minute talking about the irrational numbers. The irrational numbers cannot be represented as terminating or repeating decimals. So for example, if you remember from last year, that pi, here we go, pi was that irrational number that we talked a lot about. Pi is 3.14, and it'll keep going on and on without repeating itself. So when I talked about rational numbers being fractions made up of rational numbers, well, here's a fraction that is not made up of all rational numbers. So pi/3, that's a fraction, but because it has an irrational number in it, it's not going to be a rational number. And then let's just put down something like the square root of 2, and we're going to come back to these at another time. So let's go ahead then and talk about how we can classify our rational numbers into smaller groups. All right, so now let's start with the whole numbers. Whole numbers are numbers like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth. They have to be positive. So I'm just going to place a 0 in here, a 2, and 20. Okay, those are our whole numbers. The difference between whole numbers and integers is integer is like a whole number, meaning that it's not a fraction, but it can also be a negative. So I've got -2, -20, and so forth. What we have to remember is that these are all rational numbers. They are just broken down into smaller categories in classifying them. So then our just basic rational numbers are going to be those fractions and the decimals. So I can have 1/3 and maybe 0.24, and let's do 3.6 repeating. So now, all of these numbers are rational numbers on the left side. 1/3, 0.24, 3.6 repeating, -2, -20, 0, 2, and 20. They're all rational numbers. But then we break them down into smaller categories. So then if we look, our rational numbers then, if we want to break the category down even more, then we're going to say that our integers are going to include all of these numbers here, which are the -2, -20, 0, 2, and 20. And then that gets broken down even further into that some integers are whole numbers, meaning that they're the positive numbers only, 0, 2, 20, and so forth. All right, let's see if we can apply what we just learned. All right, 8. Well, 8 is a positive whole number. So 8 is going to be a whole number. It's also then going to be an integer, and it's going to be rational. Where negative 17, it's not going to be a whole number because it's negative, but it is an integer, and all integers are also rational numbers. 3/6. Well, 3/6 is made up of two rational numbers. It's not a whole number, so it's not going to be an integer either. So any positive or negative numbers that are made up of two rational numbers is just going to be just rational. 6/3. Well, since 6/3 can be simplified down to 2, well, that's going to be a whole number, meaning and all whole numbers are also integers and they're also rational numbers. 0.3. Well, it's not a whole number, so it's just going to be rational. 3.6, repeating. Well, it's a repeating decimal, so that's going to be a rational number. Negative 1/3. Again, it's not whole, so it's going to be a rational number. Negative 2.5, again, it's a fraction, it's a decimal that stops. It's just going to be rational. And then negative 9/3, well, that can be simplified down to negative 3. Well, remember, negative numbers are not whole numbers, but positive and negative whole numbers are integers. And so it's going to be an integer and it's going to be rational. So in today's lesson, we took a look at how rational numbers can be broken down into different classifications: whole numbers, the integers, and then of course the rational.